Good evening and welcome to Athens City Council. It's Monday, September 12th at 7 p.m. And tonight we're having some committee meetings, the first one being the Committee of the Whole. I do have a slight modification in the agenda in that we had originally hoped the Community Relations Commission would be here for their annual report, and the chair is unable to be here tonight, so we'll have to reschedule that at a later time. The next item for a Committee of the Whole review is the 2023 Fees, Rates, and Review. And council members might remember that last year, I believe, when we were going through rates, Councilmember Grace suggested that we work with city administration to review all the rates at one time and to do that well in advance so that we would be prepared. And so also citizens would have adequate notice when there were fee rates that would be increasing. And so thank you, Councilmember Grace, and thanks to Service Safety Director Stone and his departments. They have reviewed the rates, and Deputy Service Safety Director Andrew Chickey has prepared a fee review document that was submitted to council members. And in reviewing this, and I see that the major change is that there is proposed a 3% increase in the sewer, and that would be for residential and for residential rates, and also I believe commercial rates. And one other item that I did notice that I had a question about was the $400 an increase in the celebration tree program. It has a $100 fee now. That is a recommendation of the Shade Tree Commission for that to increase to $400. What we realized is the $100 buys the tree, and that's it. And so if we want these trees to survive, then we need to build in some fees that will help pay for the maintenance and the expenses to make sure that we hope that the trees would survive as part of the program. I'll open it up for questions or comments from council members. Councilmember Swank?
I'd like to start at the top, section 3.10.04, alarm activation fees. I'm going to make the assumption these are for false alarms, or maybe Mr. Stone could describe what those are for.
So my goal prior to starting with questions was to talk through all of these. But I can go ahead and do that, or I can go and address questions one at a time.
Why don't you walk us through?
Okay.
And then we'll see if there are any questions after he's been through. Thank you very much.
So there is some color coordination here. and I know there's multiple colors, and I just want to talk about what each color means. So if you see the orange and the green, those are situations where there is an increase to the existing fees that are in Title I, and that's orange. And then if that fee doesn't exist at all, right now at least either doesn't exist at all or doesn't exist anywhere in our codified ordinances, that's in green. With regard to the other colors are situations where they exist in other portions of the code, but not in Title I. So red, or that pink color, it exists in other sections of the code, but it never was pulled into Title I rather, which is where we're supposed to put all of our fees. And we've been trying over recent years to clean a lot of this stuff up and have it so that all the fees are listed in one. And then that last kind of like salmon color, maybe it's not salmon, I don't know, beige color down at the end. That's situations where there's some odd language as it relates to fees in particular portions of the code. So if we go back to Member Swank's question here in the beginning, and the alarm activation fees, that is indeed specific for false alarms. And so right now, those false alarm fees exist, and they show in 310.04, and it talks about doubling if people fail to respond, but it doesn't make any reference in Title I to them doubling if people fail to failure of the owner to respond. So basically, that's a question. And that's more of a kind of an administrative question, and then a question to the clerk whether or not we think we should explain that. Should that doubling, if the owner fails to respond, be listed in Title I? So that's the first little section there. But those are no change to the existing fees. The next one is a water rate, and this is an addition. This is a fee that doesn't exist right now. So right now, if your water requires to be shut off at the city shut-off points, whether that be at the meter or a curb stop, or in some instances at a valve, a watch valve, or something along those lines, because you don't have any kind of internal shut-off in your building, you can call after hours, and there's a fee assessed. And that fee is $50. This basically says if you want your water turned back on after hours, that same fee will be assessed to have it turned back on. So here's an example. Somebody has a problem in their house and their water is running all over their house, and on Friday afternoon they get a plumber, and their plumber goes and says, hey, these people don't have any shut off inside their house. Can you shut off their property? So the staff during normal hours goes and shut it off. Nothing is assessed for that. And then the plumber works on Saturday, and then Saturday afternoon it's all fixed and they want the water back on, and they need someone to come back in and turn on the city water. And so this assigns a fee for not waiting until Monday morning, basically, to pull somebody in on overtime. Now, this is not going to cover costs, but it does at least recover some cost associated with that request of a water customer to have a turn on in an off hours capacity. The next section, as President Nisley noted, are the increases to the sewer fees, and we're just proposing a 3%. We think that's appropriate given the current balance in the sewer fund and the sewer debt fund, looking out in order to match demand on both operational costs as well as debt service costs in out years. The next section there where it talks about 90206, these are new fees that don't exist right now in Title I, but they're referred to in another ordinance that isn't in the code anywhere, but it is an ordinance. So, for instance, 04518 requires an open burning pit permit inspection, but it doesn't say it anywhere in the code. And so that's what we're proposing here in 90206. And then going down to the 2 and 11, the 1 is an increase, and this is the per month vendor fee. So from $125 to $200 a month. And it also notes that the language will need to be amended in 11.0406. It was increased in Title 11, but it didn't get increased in Title 1. We need to change that language in 02921 to say fee established by separate ordinance. Down at 111203, that's the shared transportation, and that's specifically it's no modification to the fee, but it's just a revision to the Title I description. So in Title I, we would change the name of that, or change the way it's described. The application fee plus $10 per fleet vehicle, and really what we're talking about here are like the bird scooters or the bird bikes, and basically how that fee is assigned and what it says correctly so that it reflects correctly in Title I. The next one, 291002, and there's 2 of these, and this is specifically talking about when people want to have something inspected just for purposes of having it inspected, like an optional dwelling unit. There's a provision to do that in our code, but Title I doesn't say optional dwelling unit. It just says dwelling unit inspection. And so when we refer to this particular provision, and this, in a lot of cases, there'll be someone that wants a code inspection because a bank requires it. And so a code inspector will go out, we'll do an inspection, we'll issue, basically a report that says, yeah, it meets our local housing code. And then there's already a fee assigned for that, but in Title I, it just says dwelling unit, it doesn't say optional dwelling unit. The last 2 portions, to President Nisley's point about the the celebration tree, this allows for the cost of the tree. That $100 was a cost when this was established, so trees cost more today. And so this will pay to put the tree, to buy the tree, put the tree in the ground, and then pay for maintenance of the tree for 1 year. And then the last portion specifically is to be able to get something in Title I that wasn't previously listed in Title I at all, which is the micro wireless cell towers that are referred to in Title 49, and this will pull that fee into Title I. So I apologize for taking that extra time there, but hopefully that allayed some questions. And now, if there's additional questions, I can answer them.
Any other questions? Councilmember Spielness?
Could I finish what I started?
Oh, sure.
Please.
I thought you had it all answered.
No,
Okay.
we didn't get started.
Yeah.
Okay, Ms. Stone, appreciate that. Back up to 310.04. I read the fire reports, as I'm sure the rest of council members do each week, and we have quite a few false fire alarms in a given week. In fact, the mayor referenced that was just a fraction. The one day I cited all these. So multiple questions. Number one, how do we collect the money when a false fire alarm is activated?
So we pass the false alarm report to the police department. So the fire department passes it to the police department staff who do billings for false burglar alarms will also bill for false fire alarms, and then they'll send a bill to the individual, and the individual will either pay it or appeal it. And if they appeal it, they'll give a reason why they appeal it, and we can evaluate that.
So in the case of Ohio University, do we do that in the same manner?
Nope, Ohio University won't pay their false alarm fees.
Would you repeat that, please?
Ohio University will not pay their false alarm fees.
So if you were to, since we're in sports season, wager an educated guess, since you have been service safety director, what do you think that figure stands at today without interest?
It would probably be inappropriate for me to pick a number because I just don't have the data in front of me. But there's a significant number of false alarms that come from the university.
And do we have a reason as to why that's not paid?
They are a state agency, and their state agency would say that they're not. They don't necessarily have to follow city ordinances as far as that this particular ordinance.
And does our law director concur with that opinion?
I can't speak for the law director. I've not spoken to her about that recently.
So I guess the last question would be, that's a significant amount of money. Because again, we all read those every week. As a former dorm director, well, I guess the technical term is residence hall advisor, I know how many of those go off. And if we are going to charge residents or landlords or property owners that and enforce that, well, let me ask you this. What happens if a landlord would refuse to pay that?
We could move it into court if we need.
Okay.
In a lot of cases, if there is a false alarm fee that someone is refusing to pay, they typically have a reason, like they have an appeal and they say, hey, we were working on it, it went off, I had a contractor here, and we evaluate those on a case-by-case basis. I don't have an experience right now where someone just blatantly refuses to pay. That's not something other than the university.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Spielness? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so moving down to the vendor license fees. What's the definition of vendor?
I can pull up the code.
Yeah, to partially answer that question, in code it spells out the difference between a vendor versus a peddler versus a solicitor. And off the top of my head, I can't, I'd have to look it up to see what the definition is, but they are clearly defined within code as to how they differentiate the three.
Okay.
I've got it right here in front of me if you'd like me to read it.
Okay.
So vendor is defined by code as a vendor is a person who sells legal goods or wares from approved vehicles, stands, carts, machines, or wagons. Wagons. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you for that. I do have another question. So sometimes the landlords do not, their apartments fail to meet codes. And so there's a fee for that. Is that included in here somewhere? Or how is that? And I know that sometimes they don't always address the violation. What happens then?
I guess I would kind of go back to the request that this body made of the administration, which was to propose all of the fee changes at once. That's not a fee that we propose to change, so I'm not necessarily prepared to, off the top of my head, to speak to that exact number tonight, but I can get that information and provide it to you. So your question specifically is the fee if there's a failure to, or if there's a violation of the housing code specifically, Title 29, that is not correct, so what fee is assessed? Are you specifically talking about a violation, like a fine?
Yes.
So a fine is different than a fee. So a fine for failure to meet a portion of the housing code, and then a fine for failing to remedy that. That's your question?
Yes.
Okay. I'll get that information and provide it to you. I just don't have it at my fingertips.
Okay, thank you very much.
But this is fees, to be clear, as opposed to fines.
Okay.
Councilmember Crowell.
Thank you, President Isley. Since I've been on council, we've been talking about the vendor ordinance and the vendors in the city of Athens fairly consistently over the years. I don't think we have it right. I asked Director Riggs for the number of vendors who were licensed in the month of August, and there was one. And that vendor has also been in touch with some council members in that they are not a food vendor, and I think it's a little bit more difficult for them to make it financially appropriate to pay the monthly vendor fee based on the wares that they have for sale. So I'm just bringing this up to let council know that I am continuing to sort of think about our code in terms of vendors and how we can make it better. And the input from this vendor in particular was very useful. Most of the vendors over the time that I've been on council have been food vendors, and they're able to I think do pretty well in late night and all lunchtime activities. But what really continues to sort of perplex me is that as a city, we base the vendor fee on the amount that we could earn from parking in those spaces by an automobile parking there. However, we've reserved 10 spaces for vendors, so we don't allow anyone to park in those spots from 4 a.m. to 12 p.m., meaning we can't earn any revenue from an automobile that would park in those very well geographic locations. And we don't have vendors who are permitted to, or who are paying the permit fee to vend. So we're basically just reserving those spaces as empty spaces, so we're collecting no revenue from parking, and we're collecting no revenue from vendor licenses. So I think we can do better. I think we can improve this, and I just want council to know that it's something that's on my mind, and we can, I think, improve it. I'm not sure exactly what those improvements are, and I'd like to work with the city and with the city council on making it better. It's still, every time I go uptown and at lunchtime and I want to see one of my favorite local vendors and they're not there, I wonder why, and I realize that COVID has had a large impact on them. It may be that they did return. Director Riggs did say that August was not a big month because of the students not returning really until late August or September, so maybe there are more in September, and I haven't been up very much in the first couple weeks of September. But I am interested in looking at this, and I think maybe the mayor has some comments on that.
Mayor Patterson.
If I may, Councilmember Crowell, I will absolutely work with you. I too believe that our current vending ordinance as it pertains to the West Union Street vending spaces, East Union vending spaces rather, the Richland Avenue, South Congress, whichever we want to call that area, which I don't recall when council did authorize those 5 spaces to be used for vending, as well as those on Armory Street. There's, I believe, 5 spaces there as well, the parallel parking spaces that are, vending's permissible there. That, you're right, we've never issued a permit, no one's ever asked for a permit. I do sign off on a lot of permits for vending, but they're to vend on private properties. ABH is a location, or 100 Hospital Drive, is a location that I often am signing off on vending permits where vendors are targeting an area where it's difficult to go and get something to eat at the lunch hour or whatever. So I don't disagree. I also agree, I think you're hinting at this, equitability in terms of, or the equity when it comes to certain types of vending. If you're vending art, or if you're vending jewelry, or you're vending something of that nature, it's sales-wise, it's going to take a lot more than if you're there capturing the lunch crowd, the dinner crowd, or something where you've got a lot of foot traffic and they want to grab and go and get something. So I think I'm with you. I'd like to explore that as well, and figure out better ways. But it was mentioned that with COVID, I think there's been a lot of change. If you remember, when I was on city council, we were looking for a way in which we could, when we revamped it in 2013, I believe, it was trying to find a more, what we thought at the time, a sustainable pathway for someone who had lower overhead as opposed to bricks and mortar on Court Street in the uptown area, but also respecting those who are under the burden of leases with bricks and mortar. So I would be more than happy to kind of try and crack this nut somehow.
Great.
Well, we'll look forward to hearing more. Thanks. Appreciate that. Councilmember Spielness.
Thank you. Okay, so I would like to amend what I said earlier. I think another concern, this is a fee, is the rental permit fees. Because code enforcement is a self-sustaining department, I'd like to ask whether the current fees cover the cost of the number of code enforcement officers that are needed to do the job on an annual basis. Because there's a lot of concern about whether they're getting to all of the places they need to according to code, and I'm hearing that that's not happening. So I want to make sure that our fees cover the cost of making sure that the rentals are safe.
Thank you, Member Spielness, and I'll speak to that briefly. We did increase the fees a couple years ago to cover the cost of operating that portion of the code operation. One of our significant problems over the last year has been our inability to hire a candidate for the 4th code officer position, which is necessary really to get through on an annual basis all of the properties that are currently registered as licensed or permitted as a rental. One of the things that happens is basically the primary duty of code officers is rental inspection, hands down. However, as complaints or zoning permits or other activity come through that office, which are not like a set number, the number of bushes that people allow to grow into their sidewalk varies from year to year. The number of changes to zoning or permits that people do changes from year to year. So it's difficult to say definitively how much time the code office is going to put into those variable activities in any given year. However, we know how many, to the plus or minus a couple hundred, how many rental permits will come in a given year. And If we are fully staffed with 4 code inspectors and we charge $150 per rental unit for the ones below the threshold, I think once you get above a certain threshold, it drops some because, you know, there's some economy of scale in those particular inspections. But there's enough money that comes in to fund their operation. But our ability to do so is contingent on 2 things. Number one, having all 4, and we simply haven't been able to fill that 4th position. We haven't had a quality candidate apply for it. And then number 2, the other things that come through that office, you know, distract time or take time away from being able to get to every single location. So I wish I could tell you definitively that, you know, every year, every single place is inspected. I do believe that the money we charge for it will fund that. But the physical capability of doing that is something that we struggle with some years.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the response. Any other comments or questions? Councilmember Swank.
If I could go back to the vendor's license, and I would agree 100%. That said, would it be prudent to leave that number at 125 until we've had an opportunity to bring this through the appropriate committee discussion for council and possible council action, rather than jacking it up to 200 and then finding ourselves, well, maybe that wasn't enough, or on the contrary, maybe that was too much?
I think it's a fine suggestion. We can absolutely do that if we're going to explore changes to the vending code.
Okay, Councilmember Crowell, because I had a question too.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but
timeline-wise.
it's already 200. This is just this is not an increase to 200. It's already 200. It's just getting the language in the correct part of code, I believe. I believe it has already been increased to 200 when we made the changes to the parking spot fees, hourly fees. We just made it match what you can get.
Yeah, I think it actually reflects in Title I, but it doesn't reflect 200 in Title I. It reflects in Title 11, but not in Title I.
Right, so in Title 11, it says 200.
So conceivably, you could reduce what's in Title I back to 125. Or I'm sorry, you could reduce what's in Title 11 back to 125 and just keep Title I the way it is, or we could make Title I and Title 11 match.
Yeah, do we know, actually, we don't have the law director here, but which one takes precedence? I mean, right, when we do have it in 2 different places, different amounts.
Traditionally, we've enforced what's in the actual various chapters of the code as opposed to Title I, because in almost all cases is what has happened traditionally, and I think the clerk can probably speak to this more specifically, is there's a particular interest in a given year from a particular council member or a group to change something, and there's a push to change a portion of the code, but then it doesn't necessarily reflect in Title I. So a lot of this work that, you know, we've been doing over the last couple of years is to try to remedy that and have all of those, say, by separate ordinance and put them all in Title I, so you can do this once a year and talk about changes. But we would enforce what was in the actual, like Title 11 or Title 29 or what have you.
I am in support, Member Swank and Mayor, about doing that if that's, you know, feasible.
Of reducing to the 125.
Of enforcing the 125 right now,
Okay.
with the 200 until we figure out
Gotcha.
what works best and how we might revise going forward.
So for this ordinance, if I hear you correctly, you want us to work with the clerk to make sure that Title 11, Title 1 match to say 125.
Yes, sir.
Very good.
Thank you.
Yes, Councilmember McCary.
Thank you. President Nisley, just a question for Director Stone about the 3% increase for the sewer rates. Council is aware of sewer expansion projects, but for the general public, what are we pointing to as a reason or expense to justify the 3% increase?
Sure. So what we do, and it's actually not too complicated, and we can share it with you. But basically, we project out 20 years of both operation costs, and those costs include, you know, some assumptions on, you know, both personnel costs and then our big cost drivers for other operations, which include parts, electricity, fuel, materials for, maintaining the system, electricity obviously being a big one for the treatment and movement of sewage around the city. And then the other big cost driver over time is debt service. And so, we have that 20-year outlook, and we look at what capital improvements are either happening now and what the debt schedule right now is, and then what debt is being incurred through some of the projects that we've talked about over time, and are we able to service that over time, and then have an appropriate amount of carryover from any given year. We try not to keep a war chest in the sewer fund, because it's not good business to do that and have a whole bunch of money there, but it's also, you don't want to run, you always want to run your proprietary funds, like the sewer fund, such that you're never having to subsidize it with taxes, right? Because, it should function on its own. So we try to keep it, relatively close. And then the last thing we try to do is not have a situation where you don't do increases, have a modest amount, and then go a couple years and then request a 12% increase or a 14% increase. And so we thought, given the debt service that we anticipate undertaking or here in the next 20 years or so, that this would be a modest increase that would be appropriate to keep that balance.
Thank you.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Swank.
So to follow up on that, with your modeling, is this something you anticipate being an annual increase of 3%?
So the model allows you to put a proposed increase in any given year, and then you can adjust it based on, if there's some sort of, major expense, or maybe you pay off debt faster because there's a windfall in new services that come into the city, or capacity fees that come into the city, and so your revenue starts to go more than you think it otherwise would have been, and you can dial it down or dial it up. But we try to keep it, as we project out, anywhere between 2 and 4% in any given period of time. I can share the spreadsheet with you, the tracker.
Yeah.
That might be something you'd be interested in seeing.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Okay. And do we have any questions or comments from audience members? If not, we'll consider Committee of the Whole closed and now move on to Planning and Development, and that's chaired by Councilmember Grace and joined by Councilmembers Crowell, McCary, and Spielness.
Thank you, President Nisley. For Planning and Development today, we have 4 items on our agenda. And the first item refers to a specific portion of town known as Madison Heights. And in particular, 2 lots on Madison that are located just like the 3rd lot up from State Street, from the intersection of Madison and East State Street. And the request is from a developer, an owner of these properties, and they have been through the process and application with the zoning board. And which is why it's here now. Sorry, the Planning Commission, not Zoning Board of Appeals, but the Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission voted in favor of recommending this change to City Council. And so now it is our role to review this change. And for these 2 specific lots owned by Diversified Properties, which is John Soul and Jim Bloom, they have requested rezoning 2 lots from R1 to R2. And the reason for this request is to enable them to put 2 units per lot rather than a single dwelling on each lot. And the information that they provided in support of that is that there is adequate space, that it sort of fits what is currently in that area, and that it is a beneficial plan in general in close-in neighborhoods to increase the density of the property. there have it was discussed at a couple of different Planning Commission meetings, and the minutes of both of those meetings have been provided to council. I have reviewed the minutes but was not in attendance at either of the meetings. But of course, the mayor and our service safety director were. So I'm sure we can ask them if we have specific questions. But I will also say that I got a voicemail from Mr. Soul today saying that he was unaware until today that this was going to be on our agenda this evening, and unfortunately was unable to come. But had he been able to, he was willing to appear to answer questions and talk to us about this. So I'm sure that if we have questions that we're not able to answer this evening, that he would be willing to come if we can arrange a time that works. I will say that I support this change. I think it's beneficial to increase the number of properties. It's generally an environmental benefit to have close-in neighborhoods, reduces transportation needs, and I think this is an appropriate location for duplex-style housing. Are there any comments or questions from members of the committee? Yes, Member Crowell.
Thank you, Member Grace. I'll just echo your comments. I'm in 100% with agreement. I'll just inform the committee and council that Mr. Soul has been in contact with me as the representative of this ward throughout this process. Although I miss my flower shop, I think this has been a good redevelopment of this area, and I've gone to look at the location. And outside of the fire protection issue, possibly about getting the fire truck in, up to the location, I believe we have other areas of our city that have a similar issue. I also think that I do know some of the people that live in the lower development lots, and it's a very walkable, bikeable into town, or young faculty members coming or grad students coming to campus. And I'm in support of the Planning Commission's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other comments or questions? Yes.
Thank you. In looking at the minutes, I am wondering if there is an explanation to the one voting member's opposition to this. I am not seeing it. Does anyone know what the concern was?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
I can tell you what that descending vote was, and it was basically what Member Crowell had just mentioned. It was having to, basically hook up to a fire hydrant and then bring the hose up to the facility to put it out, but also for the other four members who voted in favor, recognizing that that is the case for structures that are even further back from that parcel where they're going to build. So it was duly noted on the Planning Commission.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that was based upon the fire chief's. The fire chief had concern of having to drag hose up to those properties if it was needed.
I believe the minutes did note the distance to the fire hydrant is not excessive, but that the truck would not be able to actually pull up to the building. And but it is just one building back from the street. Yes.
Thank you.
Are there other questions from members of the committee? Other members of council? Yes, Member Swank.
I spoke with Mr. Bloom today for quite some time in Columbus, and asked him to play the devil's advocate, to put on his hat what would be the reasons not to do this, and he couldn't come up with one. So he invited me up to walk around the project, which I did. The fire hydrant is at the corner of Franklin and Madison, right there, very, very close. You can throw a baseball, it's that close. But if you look at the other property, the old flower shop, the flower shop and the duplexes that they built behind, they've been there quite some time. They're still in great shape. In fact, if you review any of their properties, first 5 properties around town, you will see that they build quality quality homes, and this is exactly what we need over there. I even checked out, the bus stop is right there. So you're uptown in a matter of seconds. So I would echo what both of you said. I think this is a good project, and it brings hopefully, we know the quality is going to be there, but hopefully affordable housing into the city, which we badly need, regardless of one's occupation.
Are there any questions or comments from any other members of council? Anything else from the administration? Any questions or comments from members of the audience? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a Title 49 special use permit. So we do quite a few of those in this particular committee. This one is to replace a sign, and this is the sign for the Dairy Barn that is located at the intersection of Dairy Lane and Richland Avenue, just before the inn, and it is a directional wayfinding sign to help people find their way to the Dairy Barn. And we do have the Title 49 application and the notes from Director Riggs with comments on that, and he has specified a recommendation that they reduce the size of the sign from what they initially requested, and also specific instructions replacing for the foundation, the base of the sign, so that it is a breakaway sign and that the concrete will not stick up too high. And but it is essentially to put a new Dairy Barn sign in the existing location, and which is within the city right of way. Are there questions or comments regarding this application? Member Crowell?
Thank you, Member Grace. My only question is probably for Engineer Stone. The breakability of this sign, right? It's almost a guardrail to keep the car from going into the creek, right? So I don't know when you come down to what's better, hitting something hard and stopping, or going through it and ending up in the creek. We have had an accident in this creek, I think, at the next turn on Dairy Lane. This is just me asking too many questions, but is there any, when do we say, hey, this sign is a good guardrail, and when do we say this sign should be a breakthrough sign?
Sure. So if the creek wasn't there, and we were having a sign be that close to the edge of the right-of-way, we would require a breakaway base. We have to do that on all light posts and various things. Now, I'm traditionally, when people are going to run into something that is a public asset, I'm all about putting a well casing full of concrete there to keep people from doing that. But that's not the best thing when it comes to safety of the motoring public. So my direction to the staff was look at this very carefully related to having an obstruction and a breakaway base. I believe is more appropriate. I got it that we had a situation further up that was really tragic, but this particular location, I think the breakaway is appropriate. I think the wider issue, if I may, take a point of privilege here prior to the other questions, that we have to understand with this particular request this is unlike almost every other special use of the right-of-way we get for a sign, because the location of the sign is not in front of the requesting property. So, conceivably, back to the devil's advocate point, if Walmart wanted to go and put a sign on Court Street to say Walmart this way, they could say, well, you let the Dairy Barn do it away from their location on Richland Avenue, and why can't we do it on Court Street? So, that's perhaps a bad example. This sign has been here a very, very long time, well before I started with the city. So, we can look from a grandfather perspective, and we can also make a case for some wayfinding. Given that this is a regional facility that, you know, many out-of-town folks come to, and Dairy Lane is a kind of an odd street it's kind of off the beaten path, and so having this facility that, you know, we try to promote about our city, you know, have a sign in arterial right-of-way that's not right in front of the property may be appropriate, and, you know, in this particular case, they're requesting just a replacement of an existing, they're not requesting anything new, so it is kind of grandfathered, but I do want to, you know, bring that to this body's attention that we're giving a really unique, a unique benefit to this particular entity that typically would be reserved for hospitals, you know, perhaps Ohio University, you know, some public entities that to have an off-site sign in the right-of-way.
Just, I appreciate that point. I think it's not terribly dissimilar from the wayfinding for Marietta Memorial that's off of East State, but it's a little ways you have to,
Correct.
And the sign is out on East State so that people know to turn there near the pool to find their way back. And I think it is absolutely worthy of mention, and it is something we should discuss and note. But I think for the benefit of promoting tourism and arts, and because of the off the beaten path location of the dairy barn, I would think of it almost sort of like some of the signs that point people towards other public tourist attractions that are often quite a distance from the particular attraction to help people find their way. And so I think it is an appropriate use of the public right of way there. Yes, President Nicely.
Just a question because of the wording from Code Director Riggs. He says the right-of-way sign must be breakaway. Additionally, it is recommended that the size of the sign be no larger than 50 square feet. And was the applicant, was the dairy barn willing to reduce to the 50 square feet?
You know, the square footage related to signs is specific in the sign ordinance and the zoning code, and that has to do with signs that are on the property. So, you know, you can kind of do whatever this body wants to do outside of the right-of-way, because that zoning code specifically talks about the property, the sign ordinance there. So in this instance, that 50 square feet is specific to the zoning code, what would be if it were a sign on the property. You know, and so I guess what we would request would be that when the council approves this, that they would say, you know, contingent upon it being, if you so desired, you know, 50 square feet or less.
Yeah. Thank you.
Following up on that, do you know the size of the current sign?
I'll get it. I'll provide that.
Well, that's this proposed for the new one.
Oh, it's current.
Yeah. So, yeah. So I'm just wondering for comparison, if the new one would be larger or smaller, and by how much? Yes. Thank you. Member Reisner.
That was a question that I had, you know, how big is the sign right now? My recommendation would be to the dairy barn, leave it at that size. Like you say, that sign's been there before most of us were on council or even thought about going into government. Hadn't done any harm. Why not, you know, if it works, why change it? And since we're talking about grandfathering things in, exceptions and so on, just keep it the same size. Don't reduce the size, don't increase it, just leave it alone. Frankly, I think the sign looks good the way it is. I don't know why they need a new one. But that's just me.
Thank you, Member Reisner. Yes, Member Swank.
This is a question for the administration. While we were having dinner tonight, my wife asked me what's on the agenda tonight. So I'd already printed it out and started reading down through this. And we got to the topic that we're discussing right now, the replacement of an existing sign. And she asked me a question that I'm often asked by members of the community. Why is council dealing with that? We have a mayor, we have a city safety service director, we have a code officer. The sign already exists. We're just replacing a sign. you're going to spend 4 meetings, countless hours, talking about this. Why can't we just do it? So I'm asking that question, I guess, out of ignorance, not stupidity, but ignorance, meaning a lack of knowledge. And this would be a good opportunity for me to get educated on this and anybody watching at home. Why do some of these, what are often considered very trivial matters, have to come before council?
I can start, Member Swank, and then I'll turn it back over to other members of the committee to further clarify. A couple years ago, really driven by the small cell legislation at the state level, we took a very, very, very hard look at how the city maintains and governs use of right-of-way. And so we took a fairly significant effort working with a law firm that has a lot of expertise in utility law to look at federal law, state law, and then our city code to pass Title 49, which is comprehensive right-of-way legislation. And Title 49 is about 30 pages of information that allows us to govern our rights of way in compliance with both state and federal law related to utilities. One of the items that came up as we were looking at this with this comprehensive right-of-way legislation was what we used to call revocable licenses, which was ultimately a tool that the city council used to basically give a permission of a private entity to use the public right-of-way for something. In many cases, it would be parking in order to meet parking requirements in the zoning, but in other cases, it would be signs placed in the right-of-way, or perhaps a fence that's placed in the right-of-way. And at the time, we did propose, that is to say, the administration proposed that this be an administrative matter, things like this. But the council members at the time were very insistent upon keeping that authority in the city council's purview. So that's why we're talking about the dairy barn sign today.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just for further clarification, these are not, council does not review requests for renewal of right-of-way permits or things like that. It's just when they're, and I'm guessing that because of this change, perhaps there was not one in existence for the dairy barn because they've had their sign in the city right-of-way for so long that they did not have either a revocable license or a Title 49 use permit. And so this is something that has been, is within council's authority to review. And from what I remember of the discussion when this came through before, one of the reasons for keeping it there is for the opportunity for public awareness and public input on these things, because the right-of-ways are sort of public property, and so there are times that there could be objections to a particular entity utilizing the public right-of-way, whether for parking or for a sign. And so it was discussed and decided that it was important for when new issues came up that those be discussed in a public manner for the opportunity for review and input from impacted members of the community. And as this application notes, the owners of adjacent properties are, not this one, the previous one for the zoning change. And so I think just having a public process when there is a new application for use of public property is, I feel that it is still worth having the public discussion for input on that. And like you said, there's unlikely to be much concern over replacing an existing sign. It's just that in this case, there didn't happen to be a sign there before. Or a permit there. A permit in place for the sign that was there, because the sign has been there. So, are there other questions or comments?
I do have one more thing. One thing we could do, and we haven't done this yet, but in order to kind of stay consistent with, say, for instance, the Marietta Memorial sign, where in order to grant permission for that off premises, like away from premises sign, we put like a public purpose for that. We could go and look and see if something could be added, beyond just the dairy barn on that particular sign. I'll take a look at that.
And a great
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
example of that is the Marietta Memorial sign on East State Street also says dog park, and city park, so.
Cool.
It could say
There
wastewater
do
treatment
happen to
plant, but it
be
doesn't.
city parks in the vicinity,
We
so
do.
we could, yes, we could request,
317 board, different public facilities we could.
yeah, that, I think that would make sense. I don't know how far they are into the design process of their sign,
They can fix it.
We can check in with them.
but yeah, I think that is a legitimate request and it keeps things consistent. Thank you. Any other comments or questions on the Title 49? Any comments or questions from members of the audience? Okay, thank you. And moving on, the next thing on the agenda is to amend our Dora. And this, I just have a small amount of information, so I will let the mayor speak to it, but what I know is that the request is to amend the Dora language to include Monday through Thursday, 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. And Mr. Mayor, would you like to expand on that for the reasons for?
Well, I mean, you nailed it on the head. That it is expanding it. Currently, it is Thursday through Sunday. Thursdays from 5 to 10, Fridays noon to 10, Saturday noon to 10, and then Sunday is noon to 8. And we've identified the Dora in the Uptown area as being very successful. And a lot of people appreciate it, the ability to go in and purchase, whoever is participating in Dora, a beverage of their choice, and to be able to go outside and experience the Uptown area. One of the things that we noticed right away, we knew it going in, but it really became clear when we have other events on Court Street, like a cruise-in, and we have several cruise-ins during the summer months, and without that, and they typically are midweek, so they fall outside the period of the Dora, and so to have the Dora active Monday through Wednesday as well, again, as you indicated, it would be from 5 to 10 p.m., which fits with when cruise-ins typically occur, and it allows people to get out and enjoy classic and antique cars and have a beverage without that organization having to go and apply for, say, an F2 permit for their event, and that becomes costly and cumbersome when the Dora could fit that void at this point in time.
Thank you very much for that explanation. And just for clarity, the Dora is not currently in effect. The Dora is in effect from May through August. And so this is a change in anticipation of next summer's activities. Are there any comments or questions? Yes?
Just spelling out of the Dora, it's a designated outdoor refreshment area. Just for the acronym.
Yeah, thank you. I kept looking at it and thinking downtown, and like, it's not downtown. So, yes, Mr. Mayor.
I'd like to give one more example quickly of one of the success moments with the Dora this year, and it was the Athens Community Arts and Music Festival. Again, not having to have an F2 permit and instead having the ability to purchase a drink from inside one of the many establishments and listen to music out on Court Street. It ran very smoothly. People certainly appreciated the ability to have beer, wine, or spirits while listening to the music being played at the main stage. So.
And from my observation of that event, I think people then also wandered on up to Court Street and supported some of our businesses along Court Street during that. And so I agree, it was a successful example of having the Dora in place. Are there other comments or questions from members of the committee? Other members of council? Yes, Member Reisner.
Has there been any interest in extending the Dora into September?
Currently, no.
Just wondered.
Any other questions? Any questions or comments from members of the audience? Okay. And our final agenda item is regarding the requirement of a rental permit for the short-term rentals and the language of that ordinance. And we had a discussion a few weeks ago about just removing the language that's currently in the ordinance that allows for a rental that is rented out for a period of less than 6 months to not require a rental permit. And that has been a bit of an issue, I believe, in terms of making sure that our short-term rentals are being permitted. And I had some concerns about just requiring anyone who rents out their property for any duration of time, even if it's to an acquaintance for while someone is, for the example that's frequently given is on a sabbatical from the university and they want to rent their property just for a few months at a time, but do not typically rent it out or do not intend to rent it beyond that particular situation. It has in past been thought that it was beneficial to, or at least not problematic, to allow those individuals to do so without requiring a rental permit. And so in speaking with Director Riggs about what might make a what might be a good solution so that anyone who is running a short-term rental business, that they would need to have a rental permit from the city, and but not necessarily apply to those sort of one-time rentals. The option that was considered was to include language that requires that anyone who is advertising or promoting their business or the rental availability of the property would be required to obtain a rental permit, either a short-term or long-term, depending on the use of the property. And so our law director thought, with that significant of a change from the original discussion in committee of this ordinance, that it would be a good idea to bring it back to committee. So that is why we are here. And I am interested in hearing input from members of the committee on thoughts regarding and the just to give you the precise language that was provided by Director Riggs. It says properties that are renting for less than 6 months in any single calendar year and not being publicly advertised or promoted are exempt from rental permit requirements. So are there thoughts or comments on this proposed language from members of the committee first? I see thoughtfulness, but no comments yet. Yes, Member Reisner.
I don't like any of those changes, to be frank. I like the original proposal. I don't see why we're giving a select group of renters or people or a break when it doesn't seem fair. You know, on one hand, you have people who are in the short-term rental business, and we're requiring them to have licenses. Then on the other hand, you're saying, well, in your case, you're only going to do it once. Well, maybe they'll only do it once this year, but suppose they decide to do it again next year. But they don't advertise, so they're exempt. And I could keep doing that for the next 20 years.
Well, I think you might have a hard time renting it out for less, like, for a very lengthy period of time with no advertising or promotion.
Word of mouth. Around here, I could rent anything just by whispering to somebody. I don't need to put an ad in the paper.
Oh, the promotion would also include being listed on any of the short-term rental sites, because that
I could just mention it in the office. You know, when I'm walking down the hall at in McCracken or something. You know, just say, hey, you know, I'm going to be gone for 6 months. Want to rent my house? Sure.
Okay, point taken. Thank you for the comment, Member Swank.
I won't repeat everything Member Reisner said. I agree with him 100%. However, I'll take a different angle on this. As I understand it, licenses, permits, and things of that nature are designed for the safety and protection of the general public. Think about that a second. For the safety and protection of the general public. Just because someone has the means or the flexibility to take off for 3 months or 6 months, whether it be for research or to gallivant around the world, we shouldn't be bestowing special rights on them, which I think you said. That's a protected category. We don't need to be getting into that business. If you rent your house, whether it's via a platform such as Airbnb, or put up a flyer on the wall in Ellis Hall, you're still advertising. I think we need to send this back to the law director and rewrite this, maybe go back to its original form. But just because you happen to be in a specific class, I don't think you should be bestowed with rights different than someone who is doing this for a living to support the economy of this community. And I would have to vote no on this as being presented this evening, without reservation.
So, just to be clear, the original form of what's currently on the books allows that all residential property within the city owned for rental purposes or occupied by a party other than the owner for a period of more than 6 months during any single calendar year shall require a rental dwelling, short-term rental, or rooming house permit from the Office of Code Enforcement.
Yeah.
So that is the current language on the books.
Right. The word I used was perhaps we should send this back to the law director for reworking. And based on what you just said, I think we need to rework it in such a way that, for example, I could make $2,000 every year at graduation by renting my house out Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night. Housing is so tight in this town. If I were to do that, I personally feel I need to be permitted. I need to get a permit to do that for the safety and well-being of those who are going to occupy that house.
Thank you for your comments. Yes?
And am I remembering the discussion right? I'm just trying to clarify my own mind without being able to see this in writing. So the difficulty that the code director was having was that it's the 6 months, that's how people were getting around the short-term rental. And so was this striking out, that's my question, was that striking out, that's already been proposed, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then the red language added in, this properties that are running less than 6 months, that's the new language on this proposed ordinance.
Right. Yes.
So we're already considering, we're striking out the 6 months to deal with Code Director Riggs's difficulty in enforcing.
The red language is a compromise based upon the concerns raised at the last committee effort.
Right.
In an attempt to still address the problem. I think the administration's preference is to go with the original language.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there other comments or questions? Okay. Are there any comments from the audience?
Mary Abel, 48 Strathmore. It seems to me that you've brought up some very good points about the short-term rentals. And I think one of the things to consider is maybe even if you rent for less than 6 months, no matter what, everyone should have a rental permit and make it fair for everyone. Health and safety is one issue, and I think an important issue, because if those houses or places aren't inspected, how do we know really what the interior is like? And it would be a way to avoid any of the exceptions. And the other thing is, just because someone has the ability to leave or rent those properties for a short amount of time, it is like giving a preferential treatment. So it seems to me the way to deal with this may be perhaps to require that no matter for what length of time, that you need to have a rental permit from the city and pay into that system so that we're all doing this fairly. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, that concludes this committee for this evening. Thank you, President Isley.
Thank you, Member Grace. We'll now move on to Finance and Personnel Committee. That's chaired by Councilmember Crowell, joined by Council Members Reisner, Ziff, and Spielness.
Thank you, President Isley. While my council committee members get seated, I will address the elephant in the room. I have tested numerous times over the past few days, including about an hour and a half before this committee meeting, and I continue to test negative for COVID. I do have an old-fashioned cold, I believe, that is driving me crazy, and it doesn't make anybody feel any better sitting close to me. I'm sure you don't want this, but it's not COVID, I guess, or at least my little windows are not.
Thanks for wearing a mask.
Yeah, yeah. It's hard though to deal with a cough when you have something over your mouth, but that's okay. Okay, so we have a couple of items on our committee meeting tonight for Finance and Personnel. All our appropriations. There are 4 listed on our agenda. I'm going to deal with these in 2 separate sort of sections because they are related. The first 2 are a $30,000 appropriation to the water fund and a $20,000 appropriation to the sewer fund. I'm actually quite pleased with our city administration on determining the need for these appropriations because our city staff has taken a very close look at our storage facilities for parts that we need in our water department and our sewer department. And they're being very proactive, knowing that a lot of parts right now are hard to get and are on back order, and that there are sort of supply chain issues. And they want to make sure as we go into the winter months that we have these parts on hand for emergency repairs. So the city administration has asked for these 2 appropriations, again $30,000 to water fund and $20,000 to the sewer fund, in order to order those parts now so that we don't have those back order problems when an emergency comes up. Are there any questions from I can actually go to Director Stone if you'd like to address that some more.
Yeah, I think you covered it correctly, Member Crowd. We're really functionally asking for money that we would typically get at the beginning of the year in next year's budget, and then we would place an order. Our fear is that you go and place an order in January once the budget gets turned on for a given year, and they go up. That's 6 months out. There's a couple parts that if you've been down and looked at 30 Curran and looked at the back rooms in 30 Curran and the menagerie of stuff that kind of looks like Lowe's but bigger, with the various things that fit on the pipes that go in the ground. At 2 in the morning when it's 10 below zero, you don't want to go to the bin and see that there's nothing there and it's back ordered for 2 months. So that's the situation here. We're just trying to get ahead of the winter, given this supply chain issues that normally we wouldn't have this, but this year it's kind of a bit of a challenge.
Appreciate that. Any questions from the committee on these 2 appropriations? Other members of council? Members of the public? Okay, great. The next appropriations have been adjusted slightly since the agenda was put out. So I believe our agenda has $180,000 to the recreation fund and $170,000 to the community center fund. There's some additional calculations going on since this agenda was put out, and these amounts have been reduced. The request from the city administration, from the auditor's office, are now $100,000 for The community center, hold on here just real quick.
And
$100,000, the community center fund, 271, and $130,000 to the recreation fund, 270. So this is a total of 230,000 instead of the 350,000 that you may be seeing here. And these are for the transaction code 100. So this is the personnel line for these funds. And it really, from a closer examination, looks like we didn't appropriate enough at the beginning of the year for these funds. And I'm going to ask Director Stone to speak to this a little bit more. Not seeing Auditor Hecht here today. The way this would go is that there would be an interfund transfer from 273, which is the income tax fund for APR, to these two funds, and then appropriate to those funds. Director Stone, would you like to speak to this some more?
Hey, thank you, Member Kraut. So if you pull out the sheet that looks like this, this was a supplement that I sent today just as a visual aid to describe this particular situation. And you know, about a week and a half ago, when the auditor's office said that we were short $350,000 in the TC 100s for the recreation, arts, parks, and recreation activity, both 270 and 271, I about fell out of my chair and said, "Oh my gosh, what happened?" And so I did some analysis, and if you look, what you see in this document is 5 years worth of data through month 8, so the end of August. And so and what I did is I just combined Fund 270 and 271, and there's some nuances about what can be spent on community center versus what can be spent on parks, but for all intents and purposes, that's the department's operating budget. And the TC 100s are the personnel in the department's operating budget. So I just combined them. And so that first set of data is the expenditures through the end of August for each of those given years. And for 2022, we are not that far off. We're definitely higher than 2021 and 2020 coming out of the COVID years, but we're still about $106,000 less than our expenditures as of the end of August in 2019. And then the same thing for 2018. So, and that's graphed accordingly in the red down below. The next line, or the next group of data is the appropriations. And really, when you look at your appropriations in your reports, this adds up all the TC 100, all the personnel appropriations at the end of August. And so, this really kind of shows what, what Member Kraut was talking about, is that if you look at 2018 and 2019, we appropriated around $1.4 million in the TC 100s to pay for people. We had the big crisis with the pandemic. We reduced our appropriations in 2020. We reduced them even further in 2021. And then coming out of 2022, we had to project, and we only appropriated going into the year. And it's tough to say exactly what you'll need in Arts, Parks, and Rec, but we only appropriated about 1.1, a little over 1.1 million in the TC 100s going into the budget year. And the reason why I say it's kind of tough to project is because most of the expenditures, or a significant share, not most, but a significant share of the expenditures in the 100s for Arts, Parks, and Rec are part-time and seasonal personnel. These are people that come in anything from lifeguards to cashiers to front desk monitors to exercise monitors to the instructors to coaches to and such. And so it's really a function of how active you are. And this year we've been pretty active, more active, closer to the 2019 level of activity than certainly the 2020 or the 2021 level of activity. And so you can see that in the red in what we've spent through the end of month 8. So I guess the thing that is important to recognize when you look at what I called out there with the delta is that we were about $400,000 remaining from our original appropriations to what we had spent by the end of August in 2019, and we're really only about $200,000 now. And so that's where that concern lies. The auditor's office kind of dialed it in and said it looks like we're going to need an additional about 130 in the 270 fund and 100 in the comm center fund in order to make it work. To give us a little bit of peace of mind, you can look at revenue down at the very bottom, and I kind of pulled that out and make it a 7 graph. But yes, we are spending more money because we are doing more things, but we're also bringing in more money as we come out of the pandemic, both on the tax side as well as on just the various fees for activities at the community center. One thing that I will commit to the body here is that at the end of October this year, once we really get our really good look at summer costs, we're going to do a deep dive in this operation coming out of the pandemic and do some kind of zero-based budgeting where we, as we go into 2023 and project the budget, because 270 and 271 always run super tight. We don't carry very much money in the unappropriated balance in 270 and 271, but it's a very volatile operation with the other services in the community that provide similar services to what the community center does and what the recreation does, and so as we go into 2023 to have that hard discussion about how much should we subsidize people-wise the Arts, Parks, and Rec operation with tax dollars versus the money that they bring in from fees. But by and large, we don't think that there's a crisis here. We just think we undershot going into the beginning of the year, given the amount of work and that staff's doing, and they're doing great stuff. I mean, they really are. There's a lot of. We just closed the pool, so that's kind of a big relief to everybody that it was successfully through the season and had the dog swim, and we're ready to go and shut that down. But we would just request this additional appropriation and this transfer to make this thing work.
Thank you, Director Stone. Mayor?
Yeah, I'm just going to add to that slightly. With that deep dive that we're going to be doing, the Director of Arts, Parks, and Recreation, Catherine and Jordan, is also we're going to have that conversation and think, much like we did tonight with the Committee of the Whole, with the fees and rates review. That's another thing that we're going to be doing within Arts, Parks, and Recreation, is taking a real thorough look-see at what has been held static for a long time when it comes to our rates and fees. We'll look at everything from pools to programming that goes into Arts West, programming that goes on within the community center. So that'll be part of our calculus as we're looking forward.
Thank you, and I'll just echo that I've had the privilege of working closely with Catherine Ann Jordan and her staff, especially this fall and over the summer months, and I think we have the right people in place, and I'm just really pleased with the direction that the department is taking, and I commend the city administration on those staff members. Anybody on the committee have anything to say about these appropriations in 270 and 271? Mm-hmm. Other members of council? Member Swank.
You mentioned transferring money from 273, the income tax fund. Any particular reason from 273 as opposed to the general fund?
So that particular levy, the intent behind it was to be able to, number one, service the debt on the pool, and then pay for other capital improvements of the park. But recognizing that, from time to time there is a need to subsidize operations, that was written into the levy. And so our thinking on requesting it out of 273 is it specifically was the levy for Arts, Parks, and Recreation, primarily capital, but also had operations written in there. And so given that the shortfall now is specifically in Arts, Parks, and Recreation, we thought that would be most in line with what the voters requested. But I mean, you could take it from the general fund, but I just think it probably is more appropriate to come from 273.
So if it comes from 273, that's $230,000 we will not be able to spend on capital projects. I'm thinking of several in particular. Pickleball. Here were another years past, and we still don't have that. Just happened to see in the paper today the Licking County put in 8 beautiful pickleball courts. I hope we can emulate that. The restroom facilities down at the West State Street ball fields, the enhanced and improved soccer facilities. What impact, if any, will this $230,000 coming out of Fund 273 as opposed to general fund have on those projects and other projects that we might want to add?
That's a really good point, Member Swank, and I guarantee you if Intel builds a facility in Athens County, I'll build more than 8 pickleball courts.
Yeah. Well, these were built before the president signed off.
Okay.
They opened today.
Licking County is ahead of the curve, thinking, their growth in that area.
Understood.
I will, and the mayor and I discussed this, and I hope I'm not getting too far ahead of him by saying that, part of this transfer request would then be backfilled, if not all of it, by ARPA funds. And so, you know, we have our second tranche of ARPA funds, and we think that ARPA is, you know, revenue replacement in many cases, and given that, you know, really the heart of the matter is revenue replacement in this particular area, and so we think that it is appropriate to take that ARPA funding and put it to backfill Fund 273 so that we don't drain it. Specifically, to your specific questions, we've already appropriated money for the tennis and pickleball court construction, and so we think we're going to be good there. That was bid Saturday. The restrooms, you've already appropriated money for that as well. We're not quite ready to bid on that, but we're close on that. So I don't think that this particular transfer, the unappropriated balance, will end up having to fund those two particular activities, but we do want to have money in that capital fund to be able to do the important things that we want to do in Arts, Parks, and Recreation in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Members of the public. Okay, thank you, President Isley. That ends Finance and Personnel.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Crowell. We'll move on to Transportation, chaired by Councilmember Reisner, and joined by Councilmembers Grace, Ziff, and Swank.
Okay, now that we're all settled in, there's 3 items under Transportation Committee. Municipal Bridge Inspection Program for 2023 renewal, municipal parking garage suspension of fees, and continuous parking suspension of fees for specified dates. Municipal Bridge Inspection Program, we go through this, I think, about every year, haven't we?
It's been about 8 years.
8 years?
It hadn't been forever, but ODOT's been paying for it for about 8 years
Uh-huh.
at this point.
Yeah, so on our shared drive, there's the legislation, it's 12 pages long. I'm sure you've all read it. It's pretty much boilerplate. So all we really need to do is have an ordinance, pass it, and sign off on it. Any idea how many bridges they're going to inspect?
We have 5 bridges in the city that
They're going to inspect all of them?
Yeah, I take that back. If you count the shorter spans, I think there are 8.
Uh-huh.
But 5 more significant bridges. Those have to be inspected every year. A report submitted to ODOT. We did it ourselves for a number of years, and then a few years ago, as I mentioned, ODOT began paying for cities, basically. It's just that the city has to give them permission to pay for it. So
okay.
we gladly, we'll give them permission.
That's a twist. Something we need to give the state permission, okay. Well, now we're coming up on the holidays. Anyone have any question about bridge inspections and anything? No? Kind of a good idea to have safe bridges, I think, so. That's just me personally, I don't know. Municipal parking garage, suspend fees for selected meter spaces for specified dates and December. And this is the holiday season for shopping uptown, and just part of our program to try to encourage that. But of course, we have to pass an ordinance to allow that to happen. Mayor, would you care to speak to it?
You summed it up well. I mean, this is something that we typically do every holiday season, and giving people the opportunity to come uptown park without charge. And it's, I think it's successful.
Yeah, I think it's a good tradition. And
Do we have the dates on that?
do we have dates for it?
I have not seen the document. I can get that information for you. You've got it?
Yeah, it's.
If you would like to read it, Councilmember Swank, that'd be great.
Oh boy, Service Safety Director is hereby authorized to suspend the fee for parking in municipal parking garage, excluding 2-hour meter spaces, as follows: 5 p.m. on Thursday, December 1, 8, 15, and 22, 2022, and all day Saturday, December 3rd, 10th, 17th, and 24th.
And reserve parking is still reserve parking.
Okay. Okay. Questions on that?
Thank you.
Continuous parking, pretty much the same thing. says here, an ordinance suspending Athens City Code Section 7.05.03, continuous parking in the same location from Sunday, December 18, 2022 through midnight on Monday, January 2nd, 2023. Member Grace.
Something that I've wondered about is because Ohio University is on semesters and their winter semester does not resume until January 17th, whether this should be extended until just before the students return. Because I think at times, at least, the idea was that there's less demand for the on-street parking during the break when students are gone, but also that folks who might leave a vehicle here to travel home over break should not have to figure out a way to avoid the tickets because they're out of town. So I have wondered whether that should match the university's winter break schedule as it is now, rather than going back into effect immediately after the first of the year.
Good question. Anyone got an answer? Mayor?
I don't know if there's an answer, but I will say I like the idea, and it makes perfect sense, is to just extend this or amend this to where it does match when the students are away, so they don't have to worry about walking their car every 24 hours or whatever.
So if we
go ahead.
So if we were to do that, we'd want to go both ways. In other words, start it when they shut down, and then pick it up.
Let's look at those dates. Yep,
Yeah.
right, because off the top of my head, I don't know when the last day of finals is, and
December 10th.
December 10th.
December 10th. Well, thank you.
That's not off the top of my head. I have the calendar pulled up.
Yeah, the residence halls close at 8 p.m. on Friday, December 9th.
Right.
I know that from a retail standpoint, by doing it that way, it gives the retail folks an additional weekend of free parking, so to speak, which would encourage more people to come uptown. But yeah, it ends December 9th, 2022 at 8 o'clock.
Well, we already have the free weekend parking in place on December 10th because that was in the previous ordinance. This is for the parking beyond.
Yeah, no, I know that. What I'm saying, we started, it's going to continuous. The key word here is continuous. The day it starts till the day it ends. So that picks up Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
But it's not about free parking. It's about parking in neighborhoods where you leave your car on the street for the continuous parking.
But for some people, that is uptown. Anyway.
Mayor, did you have a comment?
Just a point of clarification. So metered parking stays metered parking except for what council is going to take up to allow for free parking at meters. But everywhere else, yes, Councilmember Swank, it would be the 24-hour law that we amend to allow for continuous parking from the 10th of December, which I'm fine with, until the 19th of January, or whatever those dates are for our large population who goes away, by and large. And bear in mind that if they have vehicles and they are leaving, a lot of them are taking that vehicle to go home. So it's only, but a lot of them commute together. So it's not a bad idea moving forward.
Are we going to do metered parking too? Do we suspend that at all? No, okay.
The only suspension is the previous ordinance.
In the garage.
Where you read the times, days and times in which we will allow for free parking at the street meters as well as specific locations within the parking garage on certain dates.
Does that say street meters?
Yeah.
Oh, is it street?
We don't.
Oh, so it's just parking garage.
parking
garage.
We have done something in the past.
We did in the past, not last year.
Oh, we didn't do it last year? Well, thank you for the correction on that. So, but council has taken that up in the past.
So I guess are we considering that? The reason I ask, if we are, would be make sense to do all three together.
It would.
If we're
What's the
considering-
administration's opinion?
You know, the purpose of street meters is to turn over
Yes.
and not store a vehicle for an extended period of time. I think that's more important on weekdays than weekends, because you know, the unfortunate situation would be somebody who works on Monday after, you know, school is out, you know, to go, and who works at whatever uptown establishment is just park the car there all day, as opposed to, so, you know, if I were to recommend something, it would be to make it coincide with those you know, the free times in the garage on those extra weekend days. That would be the time we would do the street meters versus the entire block of time up until the holidays. So, like, I wouldn't recommend it on weekdays, I guess, for street
Okay.
meters.
Member Grace.
I think, as we've done in past, to waive the meter enforcement on the Thursday nights and the Saturdays in December works well, because the Thursday nights are when we have historically had uptown holiday celebrations, and then Saturdays are advantageous for promoting and encouraging uptown shoppers.
Mayor.
Before we go any further down the street metered parking, and again, I apologize to council and the viewing audience tonight, would be that I meet with the UBA and talk to the Uptown Business Association and see what their position is, because of what Director Stone was just indicating. That can be a challenge, to where if someone is storage parking in that space on those certain days, it would certainly impede the turnover at the parking meters. So let me talk to
Right.
to a UBA.
Well, at the moment, we have two ordinances that we're considering. Street parking, meter parking, I meant, that could be a third ordinance, rather than trying to amend one of these to include that.
It could be,
That way we can move on these now,
yes.
and then you can come back with this, with something that we can consider. Would that work? Ready? Mr. Dulac, who are you and who do you represent?
Robert Dulac, live on Morris Avenue here in the city of Athens, and just representing myself. So the 24-hour parking suspension, I've always thought of it as being more about residents than about the students. So it enables somebody who's out of town on vacation over the holidays to not have to move their car. And that would have been a factor for me, but I did have a place to park mine in previous years. But for other people, they don't have a space off the street. And so I think it more is being about residents than about students. But it's a little both, probably. So that's one point I wanted to make. The other is that last year, I remember specifically thinking that why did this end on January, was it the 1st even? I don't know what the date was exactly, but it was much earlier than the school restarted. People could still be on vacation, and the year before I was, but I had a place to park my car off street. It would have made more sense, and it occurred to me last year, it made more sense to coincide it with the actual full winter break that the university is off. Mm-hmm. The one thing to note, though, is this year, this period is longer than normal because the university, for some reason, shifted the dates starting in January for spring a week later, and from then on, for the rest of the year, all the start dates and end dates for the semesters are a week later. So this time, winter break ends, or the fall session ends earlier than it will next year. And so there's an extra week in here this year. So just keep that in mind when you're doing this. It's a long period of time this year. It's a week longer than it will be next year if things stay the same. This is the way the university's doing this. But yeah, they, instead of matching the week, they offset the essentially delayed classes a week every term in 2023, but they didn't start it in the academic year this year. Really weird. They did it on the calendar year and not the academic year. So it throws things off a little for this break. So just keep that in mind.
17th.
It could be because there's a total eclipse in 2023.
Yeah.
That would throw things off. Yeah. Any other comments on parking? Well, that's all for transportation.
Thank you, Councilmember Reisner. And we'll stand adjourned at 8:39 PM and see you all next Monday night.